Red 40. It feels like it's in just about every single processed food item or colorful drink, even if we never check. I mean, just look at all this variety. It's enough to make a child lose their mind, which is unfortunate because they're the ones most vulnerable to the substance. Red 40 has been banned in the UK, France, Austria, Finland, Norway, and several other European countries. Not the US, except for California's public schools. Again, noting the fact that the kids are most vulnerable to the substance, it makes sense even if the limitations themselves are very limited. Before I go on though, what is Red 40? Well, to keep it brief, Red 40 or Allura Red AC is a synthetic food dye that appears bright red. The dye itself is actually made of petroleum, which I don't know how that makes it into food, but I'm not a food scientist, am I? Either way, like I said before, you can find it in most processed foods like yogurt, cereal, candy, drinks, etc. Now, as you all know, the product itself has quite a bit of controversy, so I decided to try to play devil's advocate and see where the benefits of Red 40 are. On a more serious note, there are studies that link it to behavioral issues in children and especially with those that have ADHD. Now, pause. Why have these other nations banned it but not the US? Surely there has to be some reason. Well, just kidding, maybe, but essentially the European countries would rather be safe than sorry and point the companies elsewhere for food dyes, and that's just the general practice over there. On the other hand though, the US has just gone, and kind of just lets it slide. Another thing to note is that the countries in the European Union that actually don't have a ban on Red 40 still require a label to notify of its possible effects. Again, the US does not do this, but feel free to go on a scavenger hunt through all the other unintelligible words in the ingredients, like whatever this says. Now, Red 40 is one of the most popular of these synthetic food dyes, but it is far from some of the worst ones, which have caused cancer in animals. In fact, there's another food dye that has been under scrutiny for some time now. This dye has been banned in California under the Food Safety Act. This dye has been linked to thyroid cancer in animals and behavioral issues in children. This dye is called Red 3. Now, before I go on, isn't it kind of weird how all of these sort of dyes are just kind of labeled and numbered? You don't really hear them called by their full name. I already named Red 40, but why is it called Red 40 and not Allura Red AC? Well, the reason is really simple actually. Instead of having to confuse all these names and having these random sort of assortments of chemicals being transformed into one word, they made it very simple for the readers, the viewers, and anybody else to just call it by a color and then a number, categorizing it as simple as that. Red 3, officially known as erythrocene, or FDNC, mainly comes from petroleum and has been around since the early 1900s. Fast forward some decades later, they discovered that it was actually linked to giving rats cancer. This led to the substance being banned from cosmetics like makeup, lipsticks, powders, blushes, and skin lotion care, but not food. This on its own is pretty weird, but it isn't just questionable on an ethical level, but on a legal one too. Looking at 21 US Code 379EB, a color additive shall be deemed unsafe and shall not be listed for any use which will or may result in ingestion of all or part of such additive, if the additive is found by the Secretary to induce cancer when ingested by man or animal. This would make you think that there should be no questions in the action that should have been taken for Red 3, but you'd be wrong. The FDA then shared publicly that the risk of getting cancer was no larger than 1 in 100,000. As reported by the New York Times. The FDA was also sharing that they were in the process of extending the ban to include foods and drinks. This was 35 years ago. Now, over 2,900 food products alone have it listed as an ingredient. Despite the large exposure and production of food dyes in the current world, in December 2024, the US Senate put top FDA officials on the hot seat and questioned them on their mission of protecting public health. The main point of contention being, you guessed it, Red 3 and Red 40. 23 members of Congress have sent letters urging the FDA to ban Red 3. The Senate, however, is not alone with this push, as California, once again, has trailblazed food dye bans with the California Food Safety Act and the California School Food Safety Act. With all these events and pressure mounting, the FDA is nearing a decision which is supposed to be shared in the coming weeks. Now, what does this mean for you? Well, kind of like the TikTok ban, it seems like the decision is only inevitable. This is because of one detail I have not shared yet, RFK. RFK seems to be very steadfast on his opinion about food dyes and the beverage industry as a whole. He alleges that their industry is made off of deception, misinformation, and disinformation. Trump has backed his statements. Of course, things could change, but there's also another caveat to RFK even getting in his position. As Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, that is, he needs to be appointed in the first place. If you don't know how it works, it's very simple. RFK gets nominated to a seat in Trump's cabinet by Trump. Then he's essentially vetted by the US Senate through a committee. Background checks, financials, policy, and even character is all checked during this process, and it's all checked over several rounds of investigation, reviews, and committee hearings. The committee then shares with the rest of the Senate a favorable, unfavorable, or without recommendation, along with some of the things that they found. This goes straight to the Senate floor where unlimited debate is allowed, and once cloture is met, a vote of simple majority decides his fate. See, not so hard. I might have simplified a few things or skipped over some possible outcomes, but for the most part, this is generally the way that it would look. Now be happy, more about government than the person next to you probably. Congrats! So if this all goes through, then yeah, we can probably say goodbye to synthetic food dyes. But still, only time will tell how this all plays out. And if the Europeans are doing fine without food dyes, or at least putting heavy restrictions on them, maybe we can too. So a lot has actually changed since I've recorded this. Since I made this video, Red 3 has actually been banned, and we didn't even need to wait for RFK to make that happen, I guess. So I guess the next question to ask is, where does this go from here? Likely from all the red dyes, Red 40 is going to maintain being the most popular one, and it'll probably still get some targeting. But with this landmark event of having Red 3 getting banned, I'm not entirely sure, but I'll make a video on that another time. But for now, look at that. Red 3 is gone.